What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with another episode of the Power Rangers, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Now, in the last video that we did, we basically had, like, all the Power Rangers turn into Green Rangers, essentially, right? That's one of the things we talked about. I mean, everybody except for Billy, right? You just kind of had, like, this crazy-looking Dragon Zord, more or less. They're called the Black Dragon. That came from a different dimension, and was basically working with Rita Repulsa. And that Billy was captured, presumably due to his intelligence, and the rest of the Rangers, Tommy and Jason and Trini and Kimberly and them, basically were doing what they could against like this mystery guy. And so the result of this is a couple things go on. One, this Black Dragon guy had basically cut off the Power Rangers' access to the Morphin grid, right? So they couldn't really do anything. The only exception was Tommy, because Tommy accessed the Morphin grid essentially through like a back door, right? And so it couldn't necessarily be cut off by conventional means. And so in response to that, Tommy basically gave the rest of the Power Rangers his ability to tap into the Green Ranger energy, making them all Green Rangers at the expense of his ability to tap into it himself, right? So Tommy's not a Power Ranger at the moment, is basically what that means. And so what you end up getting here are a couple things going on. The first is that we got a kind of timeline from Rita Repulsa, basically telling the world, if you don't submit to my rule, I'm going to conquer you, right? I'm just going to raise your cities and everything's going to come crashing to the ground. And of course, humanity chose to blow off Rita Repulsa and say, like, we're not going to give into this whole thing, right? And so this basically had her, by way of the Black Dragon, who essentially controls the Zords now, since he controls the Morphin grid, basically dispersing the Zords across major cities around the world to really just kind of make an example of them, right? Like, what happens if you do not submit to the rule of Rita Repulsa? The problem with this is suddenly the Power Rangers show up, right? Jason shows up and all these guys, and it's kind of wild to see that they're basically Green Rangers, right? It's kind of strange to me. I know that over the course of the television history, different characters played different Power Rangers, different colors of Rangers, but still, man, it's just weird. I mean, it's cool. It's really, really cool, but it's just kind of strange to me to see like a person who's a Green Ranger, but has the whole like really helmet design of like the Red Ranger, right? So it's a little strange, but the fact that they can now access the Morphin grid, even if it's doing it through Tommy's energy, basically now means they can get their Zords back. And so what you end up having is essentially all of them basically taking back all their Zords, right? Jason takes back the Tyrannosaurus, and Kimberly takes back the Pterodactyl, and Trini takes back the Saber-toothed Tiger, so on. One of the things that also goes on here is you've got Billy, who's basically removed from the equation. Billy's not really part of this. Zach is, of course, right? He's the Mastodon, but Billy's Triceratops is essentially being controlled now by the Black Dragon. And admittedly, the Triceratops is cool, but it's really just kind of a tank. Each one of the Zords kind of has their own capabilities, but the biggest issue you have with the Zords is that individually, they're not all that strong. The Tyrannosaurus is cool, the Dragon Zord is really cool in and of himself, but the problem is that they're designed to work in a situation where they're greater than the sum of their parts, hence the Megazord. And so when you have these individual Zords kind of facing off, or you have like the Triceratops facing off against the Tyrannosaurus and the Saber-toothed Tiger and the Pterodactyl and the Mastodon, there's not a whole lot it can do. The whole situation is complicated even further when Tommy reveals that he still has access to the Dragon Zord, albeit he's not really a Ranger, so he can't really pilot it in the traditional sense. Instead, he's using his Dragon Dagger, right? His flute. He's singing songs and winning the day. But ultimately, it's one of these things where this Black Dragon guy is essentially cornered, right? He's got like a Triceratops at his disposal, and that kind of seems to be it. And so what you end up getting is this kind of transition where you pick up with Billy and Goldar. And this is why I say the way Goldar's handled here is amazing, because normally Goldar's is kind of a throwaway guy, you know, it's Goldar, right? He was kind of a goof in the TV show. In the comic, he's amazing. And there's this really cool situation where, because they're in the dark dimension, that's basically controlled by Goldar, right? I mean, that's really what this is. Goldar kind of decides what does and doesn't go on there. And that's kind of the crazy thing, is because in this conversation that they're having, Billy is largely observing everything that's going on, right? In terms of like this kind of viewing sphere, more or less, just sort of observing every single thing that's happening. And there's a kind of agreement, right, between him and Goldar, where it's kind of like, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of this Black Dragon guy. Like, what do you think? And Goldar's like, no, I don't really like him either, right? Like, I'm not a huge fan of this guy. This guy came up out of nowhere and basically told Rita Repulsa he could help her do what I could not. Hence the reason why I'm imprisoned here in the dark dimension. So like, I kind of see this guy as a bigger issue. And that's when Billy's kind of like, so you don't know anything about this guy? And he's like, no, we don't know anything about him. All we know is like his voice came from beyond, right? Some place beyond the pines, I don't know. And then in turn, Rita Repulsa decided to work with him. And that's when it's kind of like, okay, so Goldar kind of hits at this idea, like he's a lot more observant than they give him credit for. And that's the cool, that's why I like the way he's done in the comics, right? I mean, a lot of you guys who are my age, right? I'm 37 years old. A lot of you guys who are my age who grew up with the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Goldar was a goof. And then when you look at this, it's kind of like, I mean, no, he's really not. Like, he's very, very observant. And he's like, I don't think that's his true form. And when Billy's like, what are you talking about? He's like, he shrinks and he grows at will. His armor basically builds around him. So I don't know if he's in there, I don't know if he's somewhere else, but whatever it is, that's not actually him. And that's cool. That's a huge piece of information, because what it does is it leads Billy on this kind of trail where he's like, hold on, he's like, freeze that. He's like, zoom in on this guy's neck. And that's when he realizes there's an access hatch there, right? This is a Zord, right? That's all it is. Like, it's a giant Zord. I mean, sure, it's insanely advanced. It grows, it shrinks. It seems to have capabilities and different things like that, technologies that the Zords here in I guess the main Power Rangers universe doesn't necessarily have. But at the end of the day, it's still a Zord. And if there's any one thing we've learned about the Zords and when it comes to the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, they seem to run on some form of electricity. Billy's like, okay, can you get out of here? And Goldar's like, I mean, I control the dark dimension. And he's like, but I mean, can you get out of here? He's like, no, I'm imprisoned here by Rita Repulsa. Now, this is an interesting thing. This changes the way that you see Goldar's character, because it's one thing to see Goldar imprisoned in the dark dimension, and it's another to know that he keeps himself there, right? Out of loyalty for Rita Repulsa. But the cool thing here is Billy's like, okay, so I get you're gonna stay here because you feel honor bound to serve out your punishment, you know, as to make amends for your failures, your past transgressions and disappointing Rita Repulsa. But like, can you get me out of here though? And Goldar's like, I mean, I guess I could, but like, why would I? And Billy makes this amazing case. He's like, you know what? I think you're right. He's like, I think that guy's form is not his actual form. I don't think that person, that black dragon, is what they claim to be. Sure, like there's somebody who's capable and powerful, but they're not revealing all their cards. They still have an ace up their sleeve somewhere. He's like, if it really does have an access hatch, then it's mechanical. And if it is mechanical, who knows machines better than me, right? Like, I'm the best person suited to figure out how to take this guy down. And so get me out of here, right? Get me out of here, get me back there. I can get this guy defeated, done, out of the picture, and clear the path for you to get back into the good graces of Rita Repulsa. That right there is a super convincing argument. That's one of the things that I love about this, right? In the old Power Rangers TV show, Billy was the brains, but back in the 90s, it was all about stereotypes, right? And so when you had a character like Billy who was the brains of the operation, it was one of those things where he's like, he's the brain, he's the nerd, he's the goof, right? And like, that's all he's gonna be. In this, there's a kind of suave and almost a little bit of you know, espionage type attitude to Billy, right? Which is pretty cool. And that's why I love the way Billy's done here, because ultimately Goldar's like enemies of our enemies, and Billy's like enemies of our enemies. So it's like, cool. So he opens a portal, Billy gets out, right? And as soon as he gets there, he's like, okay, so here's the thing. That black dragon is fully mechanical. I don't know exactly what's going on here, but I do know it's mechanical. And Tommy's like, what are you talking about? He's like, it's basically a Zord, man. So like, it's got an access hatch. If we can get in the access hatch of that thing and we can get inside, we can find its power source, we can shut it down, right? We can end this thing. And so that's when Tommy's like, okay, cool, let's do this, right? The Power Rangers are getting wrecked, right? Everybody else, they're just getting crushed by this black dragon guy, right? So at the end of the day, I mean, they're just a distraction, right? That's why you don't really see them. They're a background thing, right? Just clinging on for dear life. Like, literally, like, Jason's like, Trini, on your 6, watch out before, like, it's one of these things where like, they're just getting crushed. Which is admittedly kind of cool. You know, it's kind of cool. I don't know about you guys, but I do kind of like seeing heroes get wrecked by villains. I don't know why. I feel like maybe it provides more credibility to the villains. I'm not really sure, especially if it's like a foreign villain you haven't seen before. Ultimately, they break into the Zord, and as soon as they get in there, Billy's like, okay, so he accesses his mainframe and is like, there's a power source here. And ultimately, once they get their hands on it, they shut it down. And as soon as they do, that Zord comes crashing down. Now, there's a problem when that happens. It starts to shrink. And as the Zord begins to shrink, of course you've got Billy in them, they don't shrink, which means it's literally crushing them, like gonna destroy them eventually. And so what ends up happening here is that as the Zord begins to shrink down, the rest of the Rangers try to get there in time, and they don't. In response, the Zord just kind of like, there's a giant mass of just green energy that's essentially a teleportation. It looks like an explosion, but Billy and Tommy are effectively yanked away. And that's when you have Trini, who's kind of going through the remnants of this rubble, and is like, hey, a lot of this stuff looks familiar, man. Like, I know this thing was called a black dragon, but like, if it's a Zord, then like, I know some of these parts, right? Like, these are parts from the Dragon Zord. That's what these things are for. Like, they're I don't know what this is. I don't know what's going on here, but this thing looks like a Dragon Zord that was repurposed, right? Switch over to Rita Repulsa. And Rita's just kind of like, okay, so like, the Rangers have basically recovered your body. And she's like, how is that? Like, how are you talking to me if they recovered your body? And he's like, because I was never there, right? Like, the black dragon was basically a thing operating on my behalf out there. It's just a vessel from my dimension, but I was never actually there, which is kind of crazy, because the question you have to ask yourself is, if the Power Rangers with their Zords and everything struggled that much against the black dragon, what chance do they have against this guy? This is made even more complicated by the fact that he says, I know exactly where Billy and Tommy have been teleported to. They've been teleported to my dimension. They've been teleported to my world, and they have no idea what they're in for. This is an alternate reality version of the Power Rangers, who is the White and the Green Ranger combined. Those of you guys who know what's going on, no spoilers. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.